Welcome back, tribe. I have a video here from Economics Nation, how multiculturalism destroyed Sweden.
Sweden was recognized worldwide as a very wealthy, developed country with an excellent quality of life and, above all, a very peaceful country. It was even among the 10 safest countries in the world. However, in recent years, Sweden has had one of the highest rates of gun deaths in all of Europe. In addition, hospital waiting times are among the worst in Europe, and the quality of education has declined across the board. But without a doubt, what worries Swedes most is the issue of crime and violence. In fact, last September, the situation reached the point that Sweden is preparing to deploy its armed forces to deal with the wave of violence across the country. Swedish Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson said, "Sweden has never seen anything like this before. No other country in Europe is seeing anything like this." The whole situation is driven by gang turf wars, personal vendettas, and a large pool of available youth. Most of them from immigrant communities arriving from other countries in Africa and the Middle East, such as Syria, Iraq, Iran, and Somalia. In fact, the leader of one of the largest gangs is Rala Majid, who arrived in Sweden as a newborn in 1986 after his parents fled Iraq. So the questions are, why is the idea of multiculturalism destroying Sweden? And why in other rich countries is immigration successful, but in Sweden it failed? Before World War II,
It's failed in France, it's failed in Germany, it's failed in the UK, it's failed everywhere. Sweden's just one of the latest models because the Nordic countries typically did well. Amongst all European nations, we all looked up to the Nordics as what the model should look like for society. They had the best healthcare, the best education, the happiest people. All their statistics, all their stats were tip top compared to everybody else. And then they accepted mass immigration. And now they're trending in the wrong direction. Absolutely shocking to nobody.
Sweden was a linguistically and culturally homogeneous country. From
Exactly.
1871 to 1940, the average number of immigrants was only 6,000 per year, and most of them came from Germany, Denmark, and Norway. However, in recent decades, the idea of multiculturalism entered the political mainstream in Sweden, and it began to receive a large number of refugees from outside Europe, making it one of the countries that received the most non-European immigrants in relation to its population. The proportion of immigrants of non-European origin increased from 2% to 15% from 1985 to 2015. Due to this rapid immigration, Sweden had a population.
Look at this graph, man. They peaked in around, 2016, 17, 18. Look at the amount, 1.4% near population growth annual. So everything prior to the massive rise in immigration. So pretty much was doing okay. Imports millions of migrants. Immediately, things start going south here. And this is probably where you start to notice them trying to backtrack on just how welcoming and easy they're making it for migrants to get in. They're probably enacting border controls. They're refusing more and more people and just becoming more closed off in general because they're seeing, as this is rising from 2012, 14, as this graph rises with the massive influx of migrants and refugees, there's another graph that you could look here that's, crime rate, gang violence, homicides, blah, 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 whatever it is, it was also increasing dramatically.
Population growth of more than 1% per year between 2015 and 2019, well above normal levels for industrialized countries. This at first glance seems a very positive thing, as most European countries are feeling the effects of their aging population. On the one hand, because there are fewer people of working age, which means that fewer and fewer workers have to support more and more pensioners.
Dude, this stuff, okay, so this is like the replacement theory of we just need more workers, so just import them. Unfortunately, you create parallel societies when you mass import people that do not integrate with the society that they've been moved into. You can only trickle in immigrants into a country so that they can assimilate. Because once you invite millions, they create their own societies within that nation. And they never really need to interact with the host nation. Think of like Chinatown. Think of like Little Italy. Things like that. When immigrants concentrate in mass in a country, they create their own enclaves. Now, these enclaves make it even harder for them to assimilate because there's no reason to assimilate. You can find work there. You can find all your food there. your friends there, your social life is all there. You don't even need to leave the enclave, yet you're still living within the country itself, but not really. So that's what's been happening with the mass migration. And on top of that, there's a culture clash here. They have different values than the Nordic countries or any other country that they immigrated to. They don't care about European values and systems and governance, nor will they ever, because enclaves is one reason. 2, they're low-skilled workers with either low or no skills whatsoever. If a country wants to import people for, quote, replacement, then they should do it in a trickling manner based off skills. Import scientists, import engineers, doctors, other types of medical professionals, anybody from STEM fields, mathematicians, etc. We need people with skills. Those people have the most benefit for the society that they're moving into. They're more educated, they assimilate more, and they're a net benefit instead of mass migration being a net negative because you have to house everybody, feed everybody, educate everybody, bring them up to speed with the locals, and that burdens the locals with their taxes, the government with their budgeting and spending, and then you create these societies that are poorly integrated that have like social contempt for one another because the differences are so apparent and the change is so abrupt that you end up with, what you see here.
And on the other hand, the aging of the population means that more people are demanding more complex and expensive health services and treatments. So attracting immigrants is one of the strategies used by developed countries to compensate for their aging populations. However, this strategy did not work in Sweden because many of the working-age immigrants simply do not work. In other words, since Sweden made the transition from an immigration based on attracting workers to an immigration based on refugees from very different cultures, integration into the labor market is complicated and they end up being excluded and dependent on state assistance. In the past, the integration of immigrants into the Swedish labor market was not a problem because most of the immigrants came from linguistically and culturally close countries, and because most of the jobs were simple and characterized by well-defined and repetitive tasks. Unlike today's labor market, which makes higher demands on education, language skills, and work experience. Anyway, the fact is that immigrants in the past had a high employment rate, while today most immigrants have difficulties integrating into Swedish society and finding a job. In 2015, the employment rate of people aged 20 to 64 was 82.9% for those born in Sweden, while for those born outside Europe, it was 53.6%. This ultimately translates into a good percentage of immigrants or refugees who are at risk of ending up in a state of long-term exclusion. And when a percentage of immigrants cannot integrate into society or the labor market, either because of language, educational level, or culture, that is when gangs begin to form in communities, either to be part of a social group or to earn money. Therefore, it is not strange that criminal gangs have a very easy job recruiting young marginalized immigrants, which ended up increasing crime and violence in Sweden, since most of the crimes and murders occur among immigrant communities. Even former Swedish Prime Minister Magdalena Andersson stated in 2022 that segregation has been allowed to go so far that we have parallel societies in Sweden. We live in the same country, but in completely different realities. We will have to reassess our previous truths and make tough decisions. So massive immigration has imposed high costs on Sweden, not only socially but in economic terms. The Central Bank of Sweden calculated that the massive influx of immigrants in 2015, the year the country took in 163,000 refugees, led to a reduction in GDP per capita of 1.7% and an increase in unemployment of 2.2 percentage points. So, as we can see, Sweden's desire to be inclusive and multicultural, receiving immigrants from Africa and the Middle East, put an end to the social cohesion and pacifism that characterize Sweden. One might think that the number of refugees arriving in Sweden is mainly due to external factors. However, a country with Sweden's isolated geographical position and two neighbors like Finland and Norway has great control over the number of refugees arriving. So the number of asylum seekers in Sweden depends mainly on the political decision to relax protection and border control. In addition, Sweden is not required to grant refugees permanent residence, but often does so for humanitarian reasons. There are other countries such as Greece, Italy, Spain, or the United States that do have difficulty controlling their borders. But in the case of Sweden, Whether it wants to receive more or fewer immigrants is mainly a political question. On the contrary, there are other countries like Australia and Canada that also accept tens of thousands of immigrants a year, but it is an immigration based on employment and labor market needs. In these countries, immigration is relatively more successful because in order to obtain permanent residency, the immigrant must go through a process that can take years. For example, those who arrive as students must pay for their education and purchase private health insurance. And to apply for permanent residency, they must demonstrate that they speak the language and have the experience and qualifications necessary to formally enter the labor market.
You see how reasonable that sounds? That should be the model for basically every country on earth. It's very reasonable. You want to move here? That's great. What's your plans for employment? What's your plans for education? How are you going to fund yourself? And you understand that there's a process you have to go through where you have to prove you've integrated by learning how to speak the language, the customs, and the rules and laws of the land. How simple is that? Is that racist to say? I don't know. That sounds crazy. If I were to move anywhere else on earth, bro, whether it be like Kenya, whether it be the Philippines, whether it be on the moon, it doesn't matter. I would expect that I have to learn the language of the country. I would have to somehow secure education if I wanted to get higher educated. So I'd need some money or have a job lined up and be sponsored by the company because I'm already bringing in some sort of skill, or figure out a way for employment. All this stuff, I need all this stuff already answered and worked through before I even step foot in that country. Coming in the ass backwards way of like crossing a border illegally or being brought in as a refugee for humanitarian reasons is backfiring on every country that has partaken in that in mass. Keyword, in mass. I mean, this was such a like sweep under the rug problem because the news in Sweden, the news in the UK, like when a woman gets assaulted, honestly, it gets swept under the rug of like, who are the perpetrators? They were never going to tell you where the perpetrators came from, but everybody knew when they would generalize where they're from because they were too scared to seem racist. It's insane. Like the insanity. We all see there's a problem. We all know where the problem's coming from. But when it's time to report on the problem, you have to pretend that you're not noticing patterns here because you don't want to seem like the bad guy. It's just stating the truth. Integrating a massive amount of people in a short amount of time leads to parallel societies that destabilizes a nation. There shouldn't be anything controversial about that. Any country that does this will fail. It's not just Europe. I mean, literally reverse this. Imagine a bunch of poor, uneducated Europeans all in mass get shipped off to some country in Africa where there's a completely different language. Africa takes them in for humanitarian reasons. And how do you think that country is going to assimilate these people into that African culture, African language, and customs when they're coming by the millions? How do you find work for these people? How does the tax system, the budget, keep these people afloat with what we saw was a 53% job rate? So basically almost half. The other half that are probably hired, a high majority probably work very low skilled, low paying jobs and are barely scraping by and are probably at the poverty level. So a majority of them that you bring in are going to be in the poverty level. And you know what poverty does to people, regardless of skin color. If you're poor, look at the effects of poverty on a community. It's people, everything.
In this way, the contribution that immigrants make to the country's progress is more visible. On the contrary, an immigration policy that grants citizenship to a large number of low-skilled immigrants ends up simply creating beneficiaries of a welfare program. In other words, a rich country like Sweden, with 10 million inhabitants and generous state benefits in a world of billions of poor people, cannot have unrestricted immigration. Otherwise, it would be creating incentives to attract immigrants who are more motivated by state benefits than by a job. Milton Friedman, Nobel economics winner, said that a country cannot have free immigration and at the same time a state that promises every resident a certain minimum level of income, regardless of whether they work or not. The current Swedish government, seeing that most crime is occurring among immigrants and that totally marginalized communities are being created, is implementing a series of policies aimed at tightening the borders and minimizing the number.
Yeah, and this is giving the rise to, you'll see the left-wing media freak out because they'll call them right-wing governments. It's conservative governments. There's a huge rise in right-leaning / conservative governments winning massive amounts of seats in elections, and it's only going to continue to rise. Let's read some of the comments. Kudos to Poland and Hungary for not allowing this evil agenda. Why in other rich countries is immigration successful, but in Sweden it failed? You cannot be serious. It's going wrong in basically every country. I'm certain Swedish citizens born in Sweden who speak Swedish and know Swedish history and culture never thought that importing tens of thousands of Syrian, Iraqi, Iranian, and Somalian refugees would prove the winning strategy for a peace-loving, hardworking, cohesive Sweden. It didn't only fail in Sweden, it failed in Germany, England, France, Italy. Basically every country accepted them and had seen a rise in criminal activity. As I said, this is not immigration, this is replacement. Same thing is happening in other countries like Germany and France. Speaking as a Canadian, my country accepts a lot of refugees as well as skilled immigrants. Canada doors wide open. I expect what is happening in Sweden eventually to happen here. And then this one's from a woman. I'm from a Slavic country. We don't have almost any migrants and we're perfectly safe. As a female, I can walk through the capital city even in the middle of the night and nothing will happen. While in cities like Brussels, you have to watch behind your back even during the day. Not all foreigners are a problem, but these specific groups are violent, misogynistic, and poisoned by religion. Every nation should put themselves and their own safety first. I don't support. Okay, gets into what's going on with the world right now. Yeah, well, I could just tell you about what's going on here in Eastern Europe, at least in Romania. I'm pulling up Romania's demographics here because I'm also curious. So population 20 million. And here's what's interesting. So about 89% of the people of Romania are ethnic Romanians. Then it leaves another 6% or so Hungarians. So we're at 95% white. And we even accepted, it says here, almost 1 million refugees from Ukraine to Romania. So that's an insane number anyways, given the population is 20 million. And the Ukrainians integrated, again, it was like what he explained in the video when immigration to Sweden was essentially other Nordic countries with similar values, similar language, similar customs. It was frictionless. So the Ukrainians that came here, yes, a bit of a burden on the system being in mass at such high numbers, but it's hard to tell them apart. Only when they start speaking. They share similar food. Languages are completely different, so that's how you immediately know. But looks, not too different. Customs and cultures, not too different. And integration is basically as frictionless as that it could get. I'm sure there's a burden accepting 1 million of them in such a short amount of time. But it would be nothing like what would happen if you accepted people that looked completely different from yourself with different values, different customs that don't mesh well with the host country. And then you get all these problems. Skill-based immigration is not an issue whatsoever. Every country would benefit from like the reverse of a brain drain, where you essentially bring people in with highly specialized skill that would benefit. Like imagine you get a world-renowned surgeon that's a specialist in who knows what. And he happens to be from whatever country. Doesn't matter where he's from. He's a world-renowned surgeon. Bring him in here. Pay him extra. Give him a visa the next day. Passports, everything the next day. You streamline the process for skilled labor. So yeah, even with 1 million Ukrainians. So basically this country is minimum 95% white. More than that. So Romania is one of the most homogenous countries in the world. So at least minimum 96%. Crime, not an issue. When I first came here, I was walking the streets at night, 3, 4 in the morning, dark alleys, Eastern European little streets, like look sketchy, no lighting. If this was America, I would definitely not go down these roads at night. If this was Atlanta or Phoenix and I was in downtown in any of those, I'm staying awake because I know what's waiting for me. I know what an American city looks like at night. It's a complete joke because in the day, it looks like a complete joke with all the tents everywhere, the homeless people standing on corners, right? We're seeing that multi-tier society playing out. And it's mainly an issue of haves and have-nots. You just feel safe here, man, at all times of the day. Never do you have to think about something crazy popping off at a convenience store, at a nightclub if you go out and have a good time. No weird things like people hanging out on street corners. You know what they're doing. Nothing of that nature. It's just safe. It feels great. Like you could raise a family here. You don't have to constantly eye your kid. They can walk to school. They'll be safe. Go to downtown Atlanta, you'll get harassed in the daytime by bums. You can't even grab an ice cream because they're trying to get in trouble. They're either trying to literally rob you. Had that happen to me. They're trying to goad people into reacting to hopefully either get punched so that the cops can get called and that they get sent to jail for a day or two so that they can get a few meals. They'll get released because they're homeless people and there's no more space in the prisons. And then they're back on the streets doing the same thing. So it's like a mean incentive for homeless people to just constantly reoffend these minor crimes so that they can afford a meal to eat and a bed to sleep on. Because anything's better than the streets, honestly. That's such a messed up system. Been to Portland. I can't believe how crazy Portland is. It blew my mind. I mean, we're having coffee at a nice little cafe with a terrace by the street, and there's homeless people walking around. I can't even repeat to you what they're doing, but yeah, imagine needles, imagine human feces, imagine all of it. It's insane. And can't even leave your woman alone for 1 second because, hey, $5, can I F? $5. Hey, sweetie, start getting at your girl. It's happened. Not only has it happened to me, it's happened to everybody I know. I mean, you can't escape it. Sad. The people living in San Francisco paying $4,000 to $5,000 a month in rent, and people are abusing drugs right there on the doorstep of their apartment. That's supposed to be luxury. You're barely making it, bro. $4,000 to $5,000 in San Francisco, and that's what you got to go through. That's what you're raising a family in. I mean, when are people going to realize these policies are completely destroying Western values in society as a whole? How far are we going to virtue signal until the end of the West? Is that what the ultimate goal here is? This cult, this leftist cult, is it going to stop once the West is destroyed? Is that the ultimate virtue? Sacrificing yourself, right? Is that like their sick, twisted goal? Like some corrupt version of Jesus, modern day, Jesus 2.0, the turd leftist version? Sacrifice the entire Western society for your righteous virtue? Okay. I mean, you commit a crime in this country, you're getting hauled off to jail immediately. You're not going to repeat rob places. There's no soft DAs here. You're not getting re-released. Yeah, I don't know, man. It's sad to see what America and the West at large is turning into, because once beautiful nation is now being destroyed from the inside out. I mean, you guys know. Look at what's going on in the southern border with the United States. I mean, they could literally stop that tomorrow if they wanted to. We have the money. We have the men. You could have a guy standing next to each other literally every 10 feet across that entire border. Nobody will get through. America, if America wanted it so, not a goddamn flea couldn't cross the border in America if they really wanted it. We all know the truth. Anyways, we'll see you guys on the next one. Let me know. Curious what everybody's thinking on all this stuff, on the Sweden situation, Europe, America's border system. I mean, I don't know. Getting crazier and crazier. Hey, everyone. If you have a minute, please head over to legionofmen.store and grab yourself some cool merch as well. We have a bunch of limited edition designs, brand new stuff on the way, and all the proceeds go to supporting the channel. We don't want to be sponsored by corporations where we have to submit videos for review, have our speech impeded, or push any products that we don't use. So thank you so much to everybody that goes into the shop. Again, it's legionofmen.store. I'll put it up here for you guys. First time customers get a 10% off, and we have a bunch of great designs by artists from the community that watch the channel and support. They get proceeds as well, a percentage of everything that gets sold. So community funded through and through. Again, appreciate you guys.